Hi again. Today's book, I eagerly awaited it. It's Fairbairn and the OSS by Steve Brown. Now, there's lots of previous books on W.E. Fairbairn, which shows his illustrious career. Shanghai, the Commandos, Special Training Centre, and the SOE. And now we have the complete and authoritative work on his career with the American Office of Strategic Services, the counterpart to SOE and SIS. Now, previously, the author, Steve Brown, had written quite a bit on World War II combatives, notably in this magazine, the Journal of Asian Martial Arts. And several years ago, he wrote this very detailed and authoritative article on Dermot Pat O'Neill, who was, of course, a colleague of Fairbairn in Shanghai and a very, very senior Kodokan Judo grade. And that article dispelled some of the myths and rumours and was very factual, very objective, well researched. And when I saw that the current book on the OSS was authored by Steve Brown, I was very, very confident that it would be equally well researched. So Fairbairn, while he was with SOE, had been seconded to STS 103, also known as Camp X, in Canada, which was strategically located fairly near to the United States border to be able to train American personnel, because SOE was very, very instrumental in helping the American OSS get started. And after only a month at Camp X, Fairbairn, who had come into contact with quite a few American officers, was detailed to go across the border and to become their lead instructor in close quarter combat, both armed and unarmed, for the OSS. And he stayed there for the remainder of the war. The OSS had established a network of training schools, most of them based in the surrounding counties around Washington, D.C., in fairly remote locations mainly. And Fairbairn taught at most of those. And to some extent they were modelled on the British system, where we put the initial training or the initial fieldcraft training up in Scotland in a restricted area, and then various stately homes. The Americans did their equivalent. The book goes into the syllabus that was taught to the OSS. Now, it's very interesting to see the progression of the syllabus from Shanghai through the Commandos, SOE, and to the OSS. It's a very interesting study. And the book, The Close Combat Files of Colonel Applegate, actually puts all those lesson plans out there, so you can see them and see the progression for yourself. And there's also comment on them and a lot of very, very detailed and knowledgeable material in that book, and I do recommend. I've reviewed it here, and I do recommend it. But what Steve Brown's done in this, he's gone very, very deeply into the specific programs that were taught to the OSS, and he's reproduced the lesson plans and the instructor notes for them. Regarding the close combat syllabus, what we call unarmed combatives, one of the interesting things is the inclusion of the tiger's claw. Now, this did not appear in the UK-based programs, and where it came from is a bit of a mystery. Now, Mika, our man in Sweden, God rest his soul, did a lot of research himself on this, and some of the people mentioned in this book he'd corresponded with. And during Camp Get Tough over in Sweden, we were able to discuss this at length, and it's very, very interesting. So that is one technique which was added to the syllabus, and other techniques were dropped from the syllabus, particularly the more police-orientated material. But as I say, it is interesting to digest that kind of thing. The shooting program included the Mystery House, which is a structure which was first used in Shanghai and then up in Scotland and so on, and then they constructed the American version at what was called Area B, and it was what we would now call a CQB house type of structure, but it was a bit different to the way those things are used now, because the training was conducted through it. He had an instructor behind him, and he was faced not just with targets, but with reactive targets. Dummies would drop or spring up or come out of cupboards. There were targets to be shot, targets to be hit with empty hand blows, and targets to be stabbed. There were sound effects. There was eerie music. There were screams. There was sounds of torture. Very disturbing things. There was uneven flooring and missing staircase steps and things like this to disorientate the trainee as he went through the progression. And one of the things the instructor at the back could do was offer comments. And Marcus made the point that stuff that comes in from behind your head has a particular resonance. Now, as I say, this kind of training has been largely eliminated. The CQB training is at a very high level now, particularly with the simulations they can do with role players and with things like simumission ammunition, taking it to a really good level. But the Mystery House is still a very important step to give the guys the experience of the stress, the unknown, and to really introduce them to a degree of task saturation, and give them methods to overcome it, in some ways inoculate them against it. And I think it's a step that has been removed, and really it was a very, very useful training method. Fairbairn was, of course, renowned for blade work, and he taught with his signature Fairbairn Sykes dagger, and it was adopted by the OSS, their own version, the OSS Stiletto with the pancake flapper holster. But besides this, he continued to develop weapons. He always had an affinity for the smatchet, the big leaf-shaped, fearsome weapon, which he had introduced to the commandos, and he modified it for OSS use as the fair sword. And this had a sheath which included some very handy items, such as a skinning/paring knife, cartridge stripper, bottle opener, this kind of thing, to try to cover as many bases as possible. Now, while Fairbairn was at OSS, the idea of making training films came up, and there was a general film on the shooting. You're probably familiar with it, where all the guys were wearing masks because of operational security. But they also planned a series, and it was called Gutterfighting. And this is the first time the term gutterfighting has been used. And obviously it's a term we've adopted for our training group, the Liverpool Gutterfighters. In the event, only two were made. It was the unarmed and the use of the fighting knife. And they exist, and the DVD of the Combatives methods is still available. But very interestingly, there were others planned, and planned in some detail, and Steve Brown has reproduced the shooting scripts for these, and it's a particularly valuable addition to the literature, because we know what was planned, albeit they were never made, and that's a real loss to history of combatives. So one of the unmade films was on the fair sword, and it opened, according to the script, with a scene in the woods where the soldiers or the officers, the agents, are being taken through the woods in a remote area. And the idea is to show the use of the fair sword in that environment. And Fairbairn demonstrates blazing the trail for navigation, and also lopping off branches to collect firewood for camp use, this kind of thing. Then you have the actual fighting use of the weapon, and obviously it's a fearsome weapon, and it can be used. The techniques were very, very simple: forehand slash backhand slash thrusts, low thrust, high thrust, so on. That was basically it, and that's all you really needed. But he also showed the use of the wrist thong. He was very much a fan of using it, similar to the way the police were taught to use the baton thong to draw the weapon and to twirl it up into the fighting grip. Another film proposed was to cover gadgets, and this seems to be mainly aimed at the intelligence gathering side of OSS, with compact pistols, amongst other things, and one very intriguing device which Fairbairn designed called a spiked necklace, which was designed to thwart a chokehold by ripping the attacker's fingers. I was delighted to see that the book covered another knife design, the fabled Fairbairn Millison. And while the handle is pretty much the foil design from the Fairbairn Sykes, the blade is radically different, as you can see. It seems to be influenced by Southeast Asia, and it's radically different from the FS. And I just wish some modern maker would do reproductions of these, like you get from many wartime weapons. It wouldn't be hard. It's not that difficult to design to copy, but I certainly would buy one. It was offered to the OSS, but they decided against it for a couple of reasons. One, and it's a pretty good reason, for issuing a distinctive signature weapon like this could be an OPSEC violation. If somebody is captured, straight away you know they are special forces because they've got this weapon. So it would have to have been issued to all the forces to mask that aspect. And also feedback from the field signified that there was really little use for a fighting knife by the agents. And what use they did have for a knife, whether for fighting or for utility purposes, was fulfilled by the ubiquitous M3. And so they kept issuing that. And to the point that the post-war successor to OSS still issued the M3, and you can see this was one of their actual issue weapons. He also included the use of the gravity knife in the program, and the gravity knife was a German design. It was issued to the Luftwaffe Fallschirmjäger paratroops, amongst others, and some were captured, made their way back to England, and were copied and widely issued, and were very popular. Just as an aside, German wartime knife designs were I'd say equally as good as the British. They seem to be a little bit neglected, but they did have good kit. The famous Solingen, etc., knife manufacturers. So the gravity knife, which has a blade and a spike, and the spike can be used particularly for parachuting, untangling shroud lines and this kind of thing, but also could be lethal in a fight as a stabbing tool. Also it's not as obviously a special forces weapon as the Fairbairn Sykes or the Fairbairn Millicent. By the way, these gravity knives are prohibited weapons to possess in the United Kingdom, with gravity obviously being such a deadly thing. A bonus in the book is the inclusion of a couple of articles about what they called the Deacon. That was a nickname the writers gave to Fairbairn because of his fairly mild appearance. This was remarked upon quite a few times. Both Fairbairn and Sykes didn't look the typical close combat instructor, silent killing instructor image. But their actions spoke more than their appearance. And these were articles at the time about the deadly skills of the Deacon, and it's fascinating to read them in this place. My only criticism of the book is that some of the reproduction of the training material, the original archived material, is very faint and difficult to read. Now, Steve Brown states that he wanted to ensure that the reader was given the unabridged originals without retyping or editing them or commenting on them in any other way. And that's laudable, obviously, but I'm sure the publishers tried to get the contrast and the resolution as clear as possible. And it's a fairly large format book. That's the only downside, I'd say. Overall, it's a magnificent addition to the literature, which sheds light on the origins of US secret intelligence. It's a chunky read, very heavily illustrated, and it really does give us insights into the birth of the American intelligence community, and it also enhances the already illustrious reputation of W.E. Fairbairn, who was honoured by the American government for his work, and really is to be considered, in my opinion, the father of CQB.